I guess whatever she was pulling from, disappointment, anger, a broken heart, whatever it was, she was able to manifest her power. Okay, so this episode opens with Maul and his unit. They're en route to a place called, I believe, Chiras is how you pronounced it, or how they pronounced it. This place has been under attack by the Grisha hunters, and so they have an outpost there, so they have been tasked with going to this location. So while they're en route, you can hear there's a voiceover of Maul basically penning a letter to Alina. He states that he hasn't, this is his third letter, and he hasn't received a response from her. And of course, in the previous episode, she was penning a letter to him and saying that she hadn't heard from him. So obviously, someone is intercepting these letters. So once they arrive, the guy, he's handing out the mail, and of course, he's hopeful that at last he'll be able to hear from Alina, and there was nothing there. However, they were given a new assignment, and it was to find Morozova's stag. It's one of those magical creatures that was fasted out of the bones of, I forget the guy's name from the previous episode, where, if Grisha kills the animal, they are able to amplify their powers. So they've been tasked with finding this stag. And one of the things that they get, whichever team finds the stag, they get a trip to the Little Palace. So of course, Maul volunteers.
General Kerrigan is offering a visit all the way to the Little Palace for the one who can find Morozova's stag.
So there was a brief scene with Alina. Obviously, she's still at the palace. Genya? I forget how you pronounce her name. She came in with, obviously, her clothes for the day, and she is tasked with riding with the general. So in the next scene, you see you see Jesper, Inez, and the conductor. They're at the bar. They're still kind of reeling from their narrow escape from the previous day or night. I'm not sure of the time frame here.
That one, Mel.
And Kaz, he walks, he arrived, and he's telling them about, his plan. He found out that there's they have an archive that contains the blueprints of the Little Palace, and basically at this point the task is to try to steal these blueprints so that they can just determine how they're going to get in and out to, I guess, abduct Alina. This, you see Jesper saying goodbye to the lamb.
Let's promise never to forget each other, my love.
Remember, the lamb was one of the things that the conductor told him to bring, right? And so he's saying his goodbyes to the lamb, and of course, it takes you. I'm going back to the episode, the previous episode, where he formed kind of a bond with the lamb, because in the throes of everything that was going on, the conductor told him to grab the lamb and hold the lamb. It was there basically to soothe him, so he wouldn't freak out.
Don't shut the damn goat! It's not bait, it's for you! I need you to calm down. Cut the goat. Shut the hell up.
So at this point, Jesper, Inez, and Kaz are going to be responsible for getting the blueprints, and the conductor is responsible for organizing a ride to the palace. So Alina, she's with the general. They've arrived at this fountain, and he's basically asking her how her stay is, how she likes the room, and basically how if there was anything that she needed that she wasn't getting, and she basically said that she really liked Genya. I'm probably pronouncing that woman's name wrong, but she's kind of uncertain as to where she fits in, what's to come, and you could kind of see she's concerned.
I'm glad to have Genya. I'm just not sure I understand where this road leads.
And he started telling her a story about when he was a little boy, how, being born to one of the most hated Grisha families or groups wasn't easy for him, and how he would go to that fountain and he would make a wish. He would always wish that he was someone else.
Throw a coin, make a wish in the fountain. Same wish, over and over again. And I could be anyone else.
And he's basically saying how he can relate to Alina on that level. And then she started talking about there's some carvings around the fountain that tells a story. And the story is of King, I believe his name, Anestus, who hired Grisha to head his military.
Hundreds of years ago, Anestus, the king, hired a Grisha as his military advisor.
And she referred to him as the shadow summoner, which is what I guess General Kerrigan would be classified as, but he said that, you know, another word for them is black heretic. And this shadow summoner was more focused on getting power for himself, and so he realized he was outnumbered. He created this army. He was trying to use the methods of the previous man who fashioned the animals out of his bones to amplify his power.
The heretic knew he was outnumbered, so he attempted to create an army of his own using the same forbidden science Moritz-Over once used to create his amplifiers.
And he is the one who ended up creating the fold. General Kerrigan was basically saying that, you know, it's hard being seen because he's resented. They realize they need him, but at the same time they see him as not him personally, but someone who's like him as the cause of all their pain and suffering. And so he said, basically saying it was difficult to never being seen as the solution, always being seen as part of the problem. And so she said, oh, so I guess, you know, I represent your solution. And so if I fail, then now they'll see me as the heretic, I guess, to kind of take the attention off of him. I guess that's what she was trying to say. And he was basically saying that he's not going to let that happen, and how, you know, they're going to change the world.
You and I are going to change the world, Alina.
And so, you know, they have these moments where they kind of stare at each other. I don't know what's going on there. But I'm like, are they gonna, no, Alina should be with Maul. Okay, Alina should be with Maul. So I just want to put that out there. No. So there was a brief scene of Maul. He's preparing to go on this hunt for this stag, and of course his friends Volka and Mikhail, they show up and basically, you know, said that did you think that we was going to let you go by yourself? So of course they're going to accompany him because initially he was going to go by himself. So you know that it's nice to have friends. So they decide they're going to go with him.
Oh please, you didn't actually think we'd let you go on your own.
So it's now time for Alina to train with Bobbie again, and this woman was weighing her ass out with that whip switch. I don't know what that was. Because every time she would mess up, she would whack her, right?
Stop it!
I'll stop when you start.
And, you know, she was starting to get the hang of it. And so, you know, she was so proud of herself, and, you know, she was able to, you know, manifest this power on her own. And Miss Bobbie was like, okay, not enough, honey. You got to do better. And
not enough. Not nearly enough.
The next thing you know, you saw the door being closed in her face. So it's like, okay, all right, Bobbie. So the next scene is basically, I mean, it's a quick scene where they're going through, Cass, Inez, and Jesper are going through the plans of how they're going to break in. Of course, this is while they're actually, you know, going through the process of breaking in. And one thing he did specify was that Inez would have to leave the same way she entered, but things happened. She wasn't able to go out that way.
The valve was turned off. I don't know how. Where's Lev? Find him.
And so, in the end, it worked out, and they were able to get a copy of the plans for the palace. So the general has summoned, I forget the guy's name, and he was asking him about Nina. We find out that Nina is supposed to be on a special mission for him, and how he hasn't heard from her. And of course he hasn't heard from her because she's been captured by the Grisha hunters, and she's now being held prisoner on this ship that's in the middle of the ocean.
Nina's been on a priority mission for me, but she's not reported in. If she's alive, she may need our help.
So he basically tasked this guy with finding out what happened to Nina. So I'm like, what was this mission she was on for him? So there was a brief scene of the group. They're back at the bar and they're analyzing the blueprints, and they realize that the way this palace was built, there really is no way for them to break in. Or if they're able to get in, there's really no way for them to get out.
There's no way in.
No way out.
Well, I thought this plan might not work.
So now they're kind of stuck on how they're gonna make this happen. So there was another quick brief scene of Maul tracking the stag, and there was some talk about the magical poo of the stag, but I mean that was the gist of that scene. They just continue on looking for the stag. So we flash to Nina. Of course, Nina's on the ship. The guy comes down to offer her a quote-unquote peace offering. He knows that she hasn't eaten, so he's offering her food, and she, of course was not, she wasn't falling for it. She was like, no, basically the only reason you would be nice to me is if you want something. And
all right, so not poisoned, but I'm a fool. You want something from me?
Then he basically said that you said that a dark guy that you're working for is going to come after us.
You said the man you work for will hunt me down.
And of course, she wasn't trying to she wasn't going to say anything. So we already know who that is. It's General Kieran. Now we know who that is. But she ended up saying that no amount of food would turn her into a traitor, basically.
I'd rather starve than be a traitor.
And he realized he wasn't going to get any information out of her, and so he left. Okay, so the group is still at the bar, and they're trying to decide what their next move is going to be. And so Jesper is like, well, West Ravka's not too bad, and we can open a bar. He's basically like, we could just, hell, they can't go back the way they came because the tracks are destroyed, the train's destroyed, and he's kind of presiding himself, kind of jokingly, that they kind of stuck there for the time being.
Krabesk isn't the worst. We can open up a bar.
Of course, they just blew him off, and then eventually he was like, I miss Milo being the goat.
I miss Milo.
So, the conductor, he walks up with Marco. Marco is the, manager of this traveling troupe that have been hired to perform at the fete that's happening at the palace.
Marco is the leader of the traveling troupe known as the Pondricon Players.
And thanks to the conductor, a mishap has befallen one of their performers, and they need a replacement.
Freak accident.
And they wasted no time volunteering old Nash to fill in. So, of course, she had to audition, which she did. And the guy, Marco, was showing her what her uniform was going to be. And, of course, Jessup was like, well, we travel as a group. And he was like, well, there are no free rides. What are your talents? And so, of course, he's a sharpshooter. And so he auditioned and he was hired on. And so he turned to Kaz, was like, okay, so you're up next. And Kaz was basically like, you know what, I'll find my own way in. Kaz, he's like, I ain't about to do that. So Alina is now with Bagra again training, and they made it a point to focus on her drinking this tea in the beginning. And she started talking about amplifying her powers, and then she mentioned the general, and Bagra was like, basically, you can't use him as a crutch forever. You're going to have to figure this out, and using amplifiers is barbaric. And of course, Alina got upset and was like, can you at least try to be supportive? And Bagra was like, I'm not your mother, but I guess that's what you've been looking for all this time.
You can at least try to be encouraging.
I'm not your mother, but I guess you'll always be looking for one of those.
I mean, so she jumped up because they got under her skin and ruffled her feathers a little bit. And she trying to use manifest her powers, and then Bagra ended up saying, well, I guess that tea should be kicking in. And of course she's like, what are you talking about? And then you saw she was back in the orphanage and back in one of her memories and it was the memory of the day the testers came and they ran out into the field to hide because they didn't want to be tested. And they came back in after, I guess they realized was sure the coast was clear. They ran back into the house. Alina wanted to get her sketchbook, and she was all set for them to run and to keep going, like to not go back.
Once I have my sketchbook, we run. We never look back, right?
And Mal accidentally knocked over a glass, which of course alerted people that there were people in the kitchen, and so she ended up seeing them, and they ended up being dragged in to get tested. So of course Mal couldn't be tested because he was injured, and something about being injured that it just doesn't work while you're being for the test. And so they basically said that they couldn't test him that day because he was injured.
We cannot test him like this. His injury makes it impossible.
And then they pulled Alina, and her realizing that if she was already injured or in pain somewhere else, that the test would fail. And so it was showing you how she got the scar on the palm of her hand. She had something in her hand, something sharp. And so as they were testing her, she was basically digging this thing, cutting her hand up. And so it gave the false negative.
But it wouldn't show if I was already in pain. So I protected myself.
So she was in fact tested. So she lied when she was talking to the general initially, but she got the false positive because she didn't want to leave Mal. So Varga is still pushing her and basically telling her she needs to focus, and then eventually she ends up saying, how many more children have to be orphaned while basically you're kind of pussyfooting around and you're being a coward. I mean, it's basically what she was saying.
How many more Ravkin children need to be orphaned to this war because you are afraid to face the truth?
And you kind of see her facial expression like she is just outdone, you know, just people, all the pressure that's being put on her. While you can understand where they're coming from, it's like there's just this complete lack of even caring, you know, about what's going on with Alina. So later on that night, she couldn't sleep, and she made her way down the hall. General Alexander Kirigan, he was up, and he was reviewing some maps. And so of course she walked in, and you know, he started talking about how, you know, if they're going to beat this, and they need to be united, and there's this rift between this East Coast, West Coast beef now, East Ravka and West Ravka. And the issue now is with the general of the First Army, which is where she came from, he's now saying is sparking this revolt against Grisha.
And there is talk of uprising in the West, led by our esteemed First Army General.
And how he's, you know, he started getting upset, and, you know, his power started manifesting, so the room is getting darker and darker, and she can kind of see, you know, he's talking about how he's always felt like he's been fighting alone, and eventually she went over and touched his wrist, and of course he amplifies powers, and so she was able to manifest her powers, and of course bring the light back into the room or whatever. I don't know how to, like I said, it's every time when I see them, I think it's very cloak and dagger, right? And you know, she ends up telling him that he's not alone, and he ends up like caressing her face, saying that he's been waiting a long time for her, and you kind of see her kind of like gazing lovingly at him. I'm like, no, girl, you're supposed to be with Mal, okay? What are you doing? And so she excused her, so she said she had to go, and you know, she left the room, and I'm like, okay. So we flash back to the ship. There is clearly a storm brewing. The ship is kind of taking on water. It's, you know, being tossed from side to side. And basically the captain gave him the kill order, basically saying that if things get worse, kill the prisoner.
It gets back.
Kill the captives.
And of course he was like, what are you talking about? And he's saying, well, the last thing we need is, if we do, you know, get into trouble, the last thing we need is for any one of them to be free. And so you can kind of see he's having second thoughts, or at least at this point he's portraying that he's having second thoughts about their mission. And she kind of took note of that, but, you know, she didn't say anything at the time. This is Nina. So Alina, you know, she's kind of deep in thought, and she's thinking about how, you know, how she hasn't heard from Maul, and you know, the courier came with the mail, and you know, nothing came for her, and you know, she started going through it. Almost, you could see she started having flashes of, you know, the last time, some of the times that they were together, just hanging out, and she is slowly feeling like he has moved on because she hasn't heard from him. And of course, she's not aware because clearly somebody is intercepting their communications. And there was this voiceover of Bagra saying something to the effect of needing others is weak.
Needing anyone else is weak.
And so she ends up going to see Bagra, and she was able to, I guess, whatever she was pulling from, disappointment, anger, a broken heart, whatever it was, she was able to manifest her powers. So we flash to Maul, and there's this, you know, it's a storm. A storm was brewing with them too, so they eventually end up having to set up camp. But they realized they were crossing over into enemy territory, and eventually, you know, they were attacked. And for a while, they, you know, held their own. But eventually, gunfire rang out. Maul ends up getting shot. And he ends up going back into one of his memories of when him and Alina first enlisted. And, you know, he went to see her, but she was already in stockade because she got into a fight with one of her superior officers. And then he ends up finding this officer and attacking this officer. And so now he's now locked up. And so, of course, they're in cells next to each other. And, you know, she saw him and she was like, "You're here." And then she realized, okay, wait a minute. If you're here, what'd you do? What's going on?
Mal, you're here. Wait, you're here? What for?
And so they talked a little bit. And then he came back to the present. And was able to fight off the guy that was about to kill him. But unfortunately, Volka and Mikhail were killed, and he was devastated. He felt guilty because, you know, they came to support him. They, you know, to help him. They didn't want him to go out by himself. So he feels guilty.
I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry.
And then eventually he ends up seeing the stag. And then, of course, there's this voiceover of him talking, penning a letter to Alina, basically, you know, saying how he's going to find his way to her, and basically the same thing that she said before about how he was talking about how he told her, explained to her what true north was, and how she was his true north, and how he's going to find his way to her.
You are my true north, and I can see my way to you.
And that is pretty much how this episode ends. So I'm going to end this here, and I will talk to you guys later.